The first missile didn't just hit a military target. It hit a shipping route, a currency, a food supply chain, a government budget. And somewhere, quietly, it hit an ordinary family buying bread in a supermarket, hundreds of miles away.
That's the strange thing about modern wars in the Middle East. The explosions are local, the economic damage is regional, and the bill keeps arriving long after the headlines disappear.
Right now, while most people are focused on rockets, retaliation, and diplomacy, something slower is happening underneath the surface. Entire economies are being drained in real time, not collapsing overnight. That would almost be easier to understand.
Instead, they're being hollowed out gradually, budget by budget, currency by currency, debt payment by debt payment.
And the uncomfortable part? Many of these countries were already financially fragile before the war escalated. This conflict didn't create the weakness. It exposed it.
Because modern Middle Eastern economies operate like a tightly connected machine. Oil flows through one side, trade routes through another, tourism, foreign investment, shipping insurance, remittances, subsidies, fuel imports, dollar reserves, all connected. Start a war in one corner of the system, and suddenly everybody's economic math changes. Take the Red Sea. For years, it was one of the world's most important commercial highways.
Roughly 12% of global trade passes through it. Oil tankers, container ships, industrial parts, food shipments.
Normally, ships pass through quietly. Nobody notices.
That's how global trade works when it functions properly. Invisible, boring, predictable.
Then attacks on commercial shipping started escalating, and suddenly the world remembered geography exists. Shipping companies began rerouting vessels around Africa instead of passing through the Suez Canal. That sounds like a small detour. It isn't. It adds thousands of miles, more fuel, higher insurance costs, longer delivery times, which means higher prices. Not just for Europe, for Middle Eastern economies too, especially countries already dependent on imports. Egypt is one of the clearest examples.
For decades, the Suez Canal has been one of Egypt's most important sources of foreign currency. Every ship passing through basically pays rent to geography. Simple business model, very old business model, usually effective.
But when shipping traffic slows down, Egypt loses billions in revenue. And Egypt desperately needs dollars. Because here's where the real economic pressure begins.
Many Middle Eastern economies don't just rely on local currencies. They rely on access to US dollars to buy food, to pay international debt, to import fuel, to stabilize their own currencies.
Once dollar inflows weaken, the entire financial structure starts wobbling. Egypt has already been struggling with inflation, currency devaluation, and debt. Now, add reduced canal revenue on top of that. It's like watching someone run a marathon while carrying a refrigerator. And Egypt isn't alone. Jordan faces pressure from trade disruption and refugee costs. Lebanon's economy was already in near collapse before regional tensions intensified. Syria remains economically shattered after years of civil war.
Iraq still depends heavily on oil revenues while dealing with political instability. Even relatively wealthier Gulf economies are now calculating new security risks into everything because war changes investor psychology fast.
Investors can tolerate corruption. They can tolerate inefficiency. Sometimes they can even tolerate dictatorships. What they hate is uncertainty. And war creates uncertainty at industrial scale.
The moment investors believe a region might become unstable, capital starts moving elsewhere.
Quietly at first. Then, suddenly, tourism slows. Construction projects pause. Foreign companies delay expansion. Insurance premiums rise. Currencies weaken. And governments respond the same way governments almost always respond. They spend more money, more military spending, more subsidies, more emergency support, more borrowing. This is where the math gets ugly. Wars are expensive, even for countries not directly fighting. Because once regional tensions rise, every neighboring government starts preparing for worst-case scenarios. That means defense budgets rise across the board. And defense spending has a strange political advantage. It's urgent, visible, patriotic. Cutting education spending creates protests. Cutting healthcare creates outrage. Buying fighter jets, that gets applause. Even if the economy can barely afford it. There's an irony here. Many Middle Eastern governments spent years trying to diversify away from economic dependence on oil. Massive futuristic projects, smart cities, tourism campaigns, tech investments, luxury mega projects rising out of the desert. The message was clear. We are building the post-oil future. Then conflict returned, and suddenly the region is once again being judged primarily through the lens of security risk and oil prices. It's like trying to open a luxury hotel during an earthquake. Technically possible, terrible timing. And oil itself creates another layer of economic distortion. At first glance, wars in the Middle East often seem good for oil exporters. Prices rise, revenue increases, governments earn more money. But higher oil prices are not always stable wealth. Sometimes they become a trap because governments start budgeting around elevated prices. Then prices fall later. Spending stays high, deficits explode. We've seen this cycle before, again and again and again. Short-term oil windfalls create the illusion of resilience, while deeper structural problems remain untouched. Youth unemployment, weak private sectors, heavy state dependence, debt burdens, currency pressure. The war doesn't solve those problems. It postpones them. And meanwhile, ordinary people absorb the real cost. Inflation is where geopolitics becomes personal. Food prices rise, fuel prices rise, electricity costs rise. Imported medicine becomes harder to afford. A regional conflict eventually reaches kitchen tables, not through missiles, through receipts. And this is where the situation becomes politically dangerous, because many governments in the region operate on an unwritten social contract. The government provides stability, subsidies, jobs, or cheap energy. And in return, people tolerate limited political power. But inflation weakens that contract, fast. History shows this repeatedly across the Middle East. When living costs rise faster than wages, economic frustration eventually becomes political frustration. Bread prices have triggered unrest before. Fuel subsidies have triggered unrest before. Currency collapses have triggered unrest before. The region remembers this history very well, which is why governments become trapped between two bad options. Spend heavily to maintain stability, or cut spending and risk public anger. Neither option is cheap. And then there's the global side of this story, because the Middle East doesn't operate separately from the world economy anymore. Europe depends on regional energy flows. Asia depends on shipping routes. Global markets react instantly to escalation fears. One drone attack can move oil prices worldwide before breakfast. That's not an exaggeration. That's modern finance.
Algorithms now react to geopolitics faster than diplomats do. And yet, despite all this damage, something strange keeps happening. Markets adapt, shipping routes shift, oil buyers find alternatives. Investors reprice risk. Governments issue more debt. Central banks intervene. The system bends without fully breaking, at least for a while, which creates the illusion that everything is manageable. But prolonged instability works differently from sudden catastrophe. It slowly reduces future growth. Projects never happen. Factories never open. Tourists never arrive. Young workers leave. Investors choose safer regions. The economic loss becomes invisible because it's measured in opportunities that never existed. And that may be the most expensive consequence of all. Not destruction, delay. A generation stuck waiting for stability before real economic development can begin. Again. Because this isn't the first time war has reshaped Middle Eastern economies. And that's exactly what makes this moment unsettling. The region knows this cycle intimately. Conflict, oil shock, debt, inflation, reconstruction, then another conflict. The names change, the technology changes, the speeches change, but the economic pattern keeps returning, which raises an uncomfortable question. If entire economies repeatedly become vulnerable every time regional tensions explode, was the system ever truly stable to begin with?